Oh, how things have changed since the beginning of the war in Ukraine. When the Russian invasion was first launched, everybody thought the fighting would be constrained inside Ukraine. Russia attacked, Ukraine defended. That was the deal, at least in Russia's eyes. And for a while, that's how the war went. But everything has changed. Ukraine is carrying out weekly deep strikes against targets inside Russia. Now those strikes are getting supercharged. Nothing in Russia is safe anymore, as Ukraine just made something unbelievable that is destined to become the stuff of nightmares for Vladimir Putin. It all starts with a weapon with which Russia is already very well acquainted, the Palianytsia. An upgraded version of this missile drone was introduced into the Ukrainian military with a bang on August 24th. As Ukraine marked its appearance with a first confirmed use against a Russian military base in Voronezh. That first use also happened to occur with Ukrainian Independence Day, which was clearly meant to send a message to Putin: this is the weapon Ukraine will use to protect its sovereignty. The Palianytsia was clearly an impressive weapon, even if details about its true capabilities are scarce, thanks to Ukraine keeping tight-lipped about the whole project. Still, for about a year now, the drone missile has been a key part of Ukraine's deep strike capabilities, and it's been wreaking havoc on Russian forces ever since. And if that was the end of the story, Putin would still be upset. Yet another weapon Ukraine can use to damage his war machine is yet another weapon too many. Ukraine was never supposed to hit Russia on its own turf, but it keeps on happening. And now, Ukraine is going to be able to hit deeper than ever before with its Palianytsia. That's because, as the Kyiv Post reported on September 3rd, the Palianytsia has just received a massive upgrade that will transform it from being a dangerous weapon into one that is a true nightmare for Russian military bases and oil refineries. We know this upgrade has happened because the new version of the Palianytsia was on display at a recent defense exhibition held in Kielce, Poland. Militani provides the key details, having been able to get a look at the weapon and presumably asking its manufacturer, Ukroboronprom, what it's able to do. The specs are impressive. Militani says that the new version of this already powerful drone has a length of around 11.5 feet with a wingspan of 5.5 feet. That makes it compact enough to evade Russian air defenses, while large enough to carry an explosive payload capable of causing some serious damage. Speaking of damage, Militani says that the new version of the missile drone will weigh about 705 pounds, about 220 pounds of which will be accounted for by what the outlet calls the drone's combat unit. In other words, the new Palianytsia is going to be capable of delivering more than 200 pounds of explosive force against a target. Of course, a heavy explosive payload doesn't mean much if Russia is able to shoot this evolved weapon out of the sky. But it looks like Ukroboronprom has accounted for that possibility and is doing everything that it can to ensure Russia's air defenses can't hit the new Palianytsia. The missile drone has a vastly expanded range of 404 miles, meaning it's now capable of hitting targets beyond the border regions of Russia. It's fast too, able to hit a transonic top speed of 559 miles per hour. Of course, many of Russia's air defenses have missiles that can travel much faster. The S-400, for instance, has missiles reputed to be capable of reaching a top speed of Mach 15, which is over 20 times faster than Ukraine's new drone. But speed isn't everything when it comes to air defense. Systems like the S-400 are designed to tackle large aerial targets that move at pace, show up on radars, and struggle to evade incoming missiles. The Palianytsia represents a very different challenge for these types of systems to overcome. That's highlighted by its ability to change altitudes rapidly, as the missile drone can fly at altitudes ranging from 49 to 1,640 feet. That's fairly low, at least compared to fighter jets that have flight ceilings in tens of thousands of feet, and it's why Russia's air defenses will struggle to deal with the new Palianytsia. At its lowest altitude, the drone is so close to the ground that any incoming missile has as much chance of hitting a valuable structure inside Russia as it does of hitting a small drone that a Russian air defense system's radars aren't particularly great at tracking. And there's more. One of Russia's main defenses against Ukraine's drones is electronic warfare, or EW. In April, Forbes reported that Russia started fielding a new wave of EW systems, designed specifically to counter Ukraine's drones. Those systems are capable of jamming and even spoofing the GPS signals upon which drones typically rely for their navigation, making them very effective countermeasures. A drone that doesn't know where it's supposed to be going is inevitably going to miss its target, especially when traveling over as large a distance as the new Palianytsia can travel. Ukroboronprom has come up with a solution for that problem. Euromaidan Press reports that the new version of the missile drone combines an inertial navigation system, which is already far less susceptible to EW techniques, with some form of resistance to electronic jamming. We don't know what specifically this form of resistance is, though Militani says that the Palianytsia can now fly autonomously, suggesting it may no longer need the GPS signals that Russia's EW systems jam and spoof at all, at least not in the same sense as a typical drone needs them. The Palianytsia will use satellite navigation, though only to course correct if it deviates from its automated course. What this means is that there won't be a constant GPS signal for Russia's EW systems to detect and destroy. Instead, satellite signals will be intermittent and only called upon when needed. That makes it a lot harder for EW systems to detect them, and even if the signals are detected, they'll likely be gone before Russia can do anything about jamming them. There is also the symbolic nature of the Palianytsia to consider. The missile drone is named after a traditional Ukrainian bread in a purposeful move to convey the message that this is a weapon that was made in Ukraine by Ukraine. There's also an element of mockery to the name. Due to the differences in the Russian-Ukrainian languages, Palianytsia is a name that Ukrainians can pronounce easily, while Russians get tongue-tied. This fact only adds to the cultural impact of the missile drone, as it's seen as a weapon that demonstrates the Ukrainian identity better than almost any other in its arsenal. So the takeaway here is simple. The Palianytsia was already a very important weapon for Ukraine, to the point where Ukraine hasn't provided many details about the original version of the missile drone or when it was being used. The new version is everything that made Palianytsia great, only better. Bigger, stronger, faster. This is a missile drone that has the potential to devastate any target that it hits, which brings us nicely to why it's so important that the new version of the Palianytsia has emerged now. First, the timing of this upgraded missile drone's arrival can't be understated. Why? Because right now the US is making it much harder for Ukraine to conduct the type of deep strikes that have proven to be one of the most effective ways of damaging Russia's war effort. On August 23rd, less than 2 weeks before the new version of the Palianytsia was unveiled, the Wall Street Journal, or WSJ, reported that the US Defense Department had effectively blocked Ukraine from using any long-range weapon systems, such as ATACMS, to strike Russia on its own territory. This isn't an outright ban, though it may as well be. Ukraine now has to go through an approval process for every strike that it wants to carry out, and a yes from the US is extremely rare. So rare, in fact, that Ukraine doesn't seem to have gotten one yes over the last few months that the US has had this approval policy in place. The need for approval apparently went into force at some point during the spring, the WSJ said. The outlet also notes that one of the anonymous sources it contacted for its article said there has been one instance where Ukraine sought to use ATACMS against a target on Russian territory, only to be refused permission. It appears that the review mechanism, as one of the sources called it, also has to go through US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. He has final say, which means Ukraine's use of US-made missiles, along with any other Western missiles that rely on US systems or intelligence to launch, is in serious doubt. This approval process created two problems for Ukraine. First, it means Ukraine's ability to use US-provided long-range missiles inside Russia is predicated entirely on whatever America's approach to Russia is at the time. Right now, the US position is that the Ukraine war needs to end via a peace settlement. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said as much, according to the WSJ. President Trump has been very clear that the war in Ukraine needs to end. There has been no change in military posture in Russia-Ukraine at this time, the outlet quotes her as saying. Obviously, this is a problem for Ukraine. If the US is pushing for peace through a negotiation that it mediates, it naturally wants to set itself up as being as neutral as possible. That neutrality could be easily challenged if US-made missiles are blowing up bases and oil refineries inside Russia, which is likely why the new approval process is in place. It gives the US options. When America wants to keep Putin happy, it'll say no to every request that Ukraine makes. A yes will only come if the US wants Ukraine to hit a specific target, not if Ukraine believes hitting that target is valuable. Second, let's assume for a moment that Ukraine has any chance of being approved for launch. Even if that were the case, the fact that it has to go through an approval process means valuable time gets wasted. A target that might be there today, such as an aircraft, might not be there tomorrow. Every hour wasted on getting approval creates a bigger opportunity for a target to become unviable. Plus, we can't ignore the possibility that Ukraine's request could be leaked to Russia via covert agents that may have penetrated the Department of Defense, which would effectively make the entire endeavor pointless. There's a cruel irony to the US need for approval that it apparently isn't granting. On August 31st, the Kyiv Independent reported that the first batch of 3,350 US-made extended-range attack munitions, or ERAMs, is finally making its way to Ukraine. Funded by $850 million provided by Ukraine's European partners, the ERAM has a range of about 285 miles and was developed with the specific purpose of giving Ukraine an affordable weapon it could use to strike both deep behind enemy lines and inside Russia itself. Now, it's not certain if Ukraine will be able to use ERAMs for one of their intended purposes. Presumably, the American approval process will extend to this US-made weapon, even if the said weapon was designed to do the very thing the US now appears intent on stopping Ukraine from doing. All of which brings us back to the Palianytsia. It's no coincidence that a stronger and extended-range version of this missile drone has emerged within months of the US creating its new approval process. Ukraine knows it needs to get as many third parties and intermediaries out of the decision-making process when it comes to its deep strikes. Building its own weapons is the best way to do that. With the Palianytsia, Ukraine doesn't have to seek approval from anybody. It simply picks a Russian target and fires. There's no delay in strikes, no worrying about whether a yes or no answer will come from the US. Ukraine is actively cutting one of its allies out of the deep strike equation for reasons that it will argue are very justified. The Palianytsia doesn't just represent Ukraine in name. It represents Ukraine's ability to do what some in the West don't seem to want it to be able to do: strike land and naval targets on Russian territory. Putin also has to deal with the fact that production of the Palianytsia is starting to scale up. ERAM press says Ukrainian officials announced plans to scale up production of the original version of the missile drone soon after its first successful strike on August 24th of last year. As of August 2025, production capacity is approximately 1 per day, the Kyiv Post says, and it's likely been boosted by an $11.6 million investment into the drone's production made by Lithuania under the Danish model of investment into Ukraine's weapons industry. This model, which, as the name suggests, was created by Denmark, is a mechanism through which countries buy weapons from Ukraine. Only those weapons are built by and then used by Ukraine, meaning the Danish model exists to strengthen Ukraine's growing defense sector while providing European countries that may not want to lose their own weapons as a way to deliver weapons to Ukraine. It's an effective model, and right now Ukraine appears to be using it to build 365 Palianytsia drones annually. We can only assume that the introduction of this new version of the missile drone will soon be followed by a combat test to ensure it delivers on all of the improvements Militani reports it to have. Assuming those tests are successful, expect Ukraine to throw all of its manufacturing efforts into this new version of the Palianytsia, giving itself a solid stockpile with which to conduct its deep strikes against Russia. Speaking of Ukraine's defense industry, that leads to another reason why the emergence of the new version of the Palianytsia is so important. Ukraine's new extended-range missile drone isn't alone. In fact, it's being joined by a host of other long-range weapons, all of which are being built inside Ukraine and will be devastating when they're unleashed on Russia. Again, these weapons are being manufactured as a direct response to the uncertainty the US has created with its new approval process. Putin won't care about the motives. What he'll care about is that Ukraine is building an arsenal of weapons designed to do the very thing that has flipped the Ukraine war on its head. The Flamingo is among these new weapons. Capable of traveling over 1,800 miles, meaning it can strike deep into the heart of Russia to take out practically any military target that holds any sort of relevance in the Ukraine war, the Flamingo was developed by a Ukrainian company called Firepoint. Politico says that it's not just a long-range missile, it's also a very heavy hitter, as explained by Firepoint CEO Irina Terek. We do not want to go public with this one, but it seems to be the right time. Flamingo is the long-range cruise missile that can carry a 1,150-kilogram warhead and fly into Russia for 3,000 kilometers, Terek tells Politico. For context, 1,150 kilograms is roughly equivalent to 2,500 pounds, more than enough bomb to level entire facilities. The new missile took just 9 months to develop, Terek adds, and her company is already at the point where it's aiming to produce 200 of them a month. So it may not be long before Putin has to deal with flamboyances of flamingos taking out military sites inside Russia, along with upgraded missile drones. And all of this is without even mentioning the new version of the Neptune missile that Ukraine is developing. Like the evolved Palianytsia, that new Neptune is designed to travel further and hit harder than the original version. You can learn all about it if you watch our video covering the missile's development. What we have here is a very deliberate effort by Ukraine to develop both a large and exceptionally potent weapons buildup, which means it won't have to worry about any sort of security guarantee that may or may not come from its allies. That's according to the New York Times, which published a report on Ukraine's multi-billion-dollar defense industry on September 2nd. The outlet quoted Ukraine's Interior Minister Ihor Klimenko, who outlined the mood inside Ukraine right now. The main guarantee of Ukraine's security is a fully capable, well-trained army that remains in constant combat readiness, Klimenko said. This is a diplomatic way of saying that Ukraine is going to turn itself into such a powerful force that nobody, especially not Russia, will ever want to mess with it again after the Ukraine war ends. So there's a future-focused aspect to the development of the new Palianytsia and other long-range weapons like it. Ukraine has an eye toward a future where the war with Russia has ended, but Russia could still present a threat. The more long-range weapons it's able to build, the easier it is for Ukraine to say that any future attack by Russia will be met with missile drones and missiles that could devastate the country's war infrastructure quickly. As for security guarantees, Ukraine would love them, but it's making sure it's prepared for a future where they may not be provided. But coming back to the present, the emergence of the new Palianytsia shows us that Ukraine is always looking for ways to expand the deep strike strategy that it has developed over the last couple of years. That strategy isn't going anywhere. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky made that clear on August 31st in the wake of a Russian attack that left 60,000 Ukrainians without electricity, with Al Jazeera reporting that Ukraine is planning new deep strikes in response. Ukraine has also used these types of strikes to seriously damage Russia's oil refining capabilities. According to Politico, as much as 20% of Russia's fuel production is now offline, which is causing widespread fuel shortages inside Russia. That's all part of Ukraine's plan. The more seeds of discontent it can sow inside Russia, the higher the chances of people rebelling against Putin. And even if that doesn't happen, Ukraine's deep strikes systematically weaken Russia's military machine, relieving the pressure placed on Ukraine's defenses in the process. And it's in this weakening that the new version of the Palianytsia fits. Ukraine has taken a combat-proven weapon and improved on it in every way possible. With the Flamingo, Long Neptune, and every other long-range weapon that Ukraine is developing, Putin won't be able to bank on the US saying no to strikes on his territory for much longer. Ukraine won't have to ask for permission, it'll just hit whatever targets it needs to hit when it needs to hit them. Ukraine is going to force-feed Putin a missile drone named after a type of bread that he can't even pronounce, and there's nothing Russia's leader can do about it. And there are more long-range weapons to come. Ukraine has had enough of playing defense, and it's starting to unleash the massive missile arsenal that it's built up over the last 2 years. Find out more about the hell that's going to rain down on Russia in our video. And remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more coverage of Ukraine's latest and greatest weapons. And thank you for watching.